Hi everyone, welcome to a Face Project podcast, stories told by volunteers from around the world. This is episode number 4, and I'm your host, Natalie Jennings. The story that you're about to hear is told by Clarence. Clarence passed away not long after this interview, and he was never able to hear the final edit. So I would like to dedicate this episode to Clarence's friends and family who might be listening. Welcome to a Face Project podcast. Face Project podcast.
Hello?
It's just pure life. It's pure
And my
innocence.
mom
It's
is a
pure
writer. My
gratitude.
So I ended up in America.
I am an adopted
because
Korean
I-
and have been all my
To me,
life.
it's a perfect blend of science and
I
creativity.
was screaming, I will live over here till I die.
Have you ever considered how your life would change if you lost a major sense, like hearing or eyesight? How would you learn to navigate your world? What tools might you learn to use that you don't know how to use already? What kind of attitude would you have? After my interview with Clarence, I spent a lot of time thinking about what he had to say about attitude, and I was really just blown away by his own attitude and perseverance in the face of some really, really difficult stuff. Since this topic of attitude really interested me, I decided to take it to some other folks and see what they had to say. The question is, how big of a role do you think attitude plays in your quality of life?
Straight up, like 90%, 95%.
And why do you think that?
It's body language. So, like, if you're happy, you emit a positive vibe, and more people are welcome to you, I would say.
I think it's everything. I think your attitude changes the lens of which you're seeing the world through. Yeah, especially the attitude of gratitude. You know, if you can find something positive to take from anything you encounter, I just think that changes how you're showing up in the world.
How big of a role do you think your attitude has in your overall quality of life?
Oh goodness. I think it has a lot to do with the quality of your life. Your attitude is everything. It kind of colors how you see your world day to day. And so if your attitude is poopy, your days might be kind of poopy. But if you have a good attitude, things will be good.
In this episode, Clarence shares his story about losing the central vision in both his eyes later on in life, and his newfound love for guide dogs. If you'd like to see photographs of Clarence and his guide dog Cruiser, head over to our website, afaceproject.com, and look under the podcast menu. There, you'll find links to all of our podcast episodes and the photo slideshows that go with them.
Nobody would be able to pick out that I was blind unless they saw me read. If I taken off my glasses or just wore contacts, I would blend in. Nobody would be able to discern that I was a blind or legally blind person. In my situation, I had with correction. My left eye had a correction of 2100 in the left eye, and 2200 in the right eye. And correction means with glasses. So I was for all intents and purposes, a high partial. And so my wife's eye condition is similar to what I once had, although I even saw more than she currently sees. In 1987, I had undergone a cataract surgery, which made it possible for me to read even an enlarged screen 2 or 3 feet away, which was kind of nice. I didn't have to have my face right up against the screen even with reading glasses, I'd have to look really close, and so reading has always been a struggle. The doctors have told me that in about 10 years I might be a candidate to develop glaucoma. My situation had happened early. It happened prematurely within 5 years, and nobody picked up on it until the 4th field test. And by that time, the glaucoma had already set in. And the doctor decided to do laser surgery, and he botched the laser surgery. He hit the nerve. And within a week, I lost the central vision in both eyes. And from that point on, my vision, which prior to the laser surgery was stable, after the laser surgery, it began a long process of downhill loss of vision, whereas today I'm totally blind and have undergone well over 11 surgeries, cutting surgeries, which were rather painful. And in 2007, I had a retina detachment, and the doctor, and a very good doctor, discovered that I had a hole in the optic nerve. He was the first doctor and the only doctor who identified that, and all we could think of is that that was a hole from the laser. You are held to a different societal standard, and one that is really unfair. Over-scrutinization, unfair, a lot of mistreatment. I've been accused of lying, and why would I fake this? Or need to be more realistic on things I can do? Well, I think all of us have a realistic idea what we can do by trying something. And sometimes we succeed, sometimes we fail. Failure is not exactly a bad thing. We learn a lot. I've learned a lot from failure, and I've had a lot of failures in my life, but I've also had a lot of successes. And I didn't get to graduate school without hard work, and I didn't get my degree, and I didn't teach for I taught for 20 years, and so having taught that length of time, evidently I was doing something right. The amount of testing the dogs undergo it's rigorous, and it's right up to the very end. If these dogs fail any one of those tests, they become a career change, and they won't make it as a guide dog. You have like a phone interview where you put in the request for a guide dog. If you're going to be a new guide dog handler, they accept you. Then they'll do a second interview, a written one, where they actually have a staff person come out and ask you a bunch of questions. And then they do a thing called Juno, where they have imitation dog. It's just a rug that they hold at dog level, that they have you walk around to get an idea of your cadence, walking ability, speed, pace, whatever. And then the third time is they do another assessment just to dot I's and cross T's to make sure that by the time you go out there and by the time they do the third interview, they have a pretty good idea as to the dog they're going to have for you. And it's just a matter of making sure that they made the right selection. Today we are at a luncheon with Guide Dogs for the Blind. As you can hear, there are lots of people who are attending, all of whom have guide dogs, all of whom the dogs come from Guide Dogs for the Blind. People either choose to use a white cane, straight or collapsible, or a guide dog. And actually, those of us who use guide dogs, we're about at, if not less than 1% of the blind population, most of whom use white canes. The preference for those of us who use a guide dog is, for ease of mobility, safety, and companionship. The dog and the handler become an integral partnership, whereas we function as one. It's a safety factor. Some people feel safer using a cane. Some of us feel safer using a guide dog. And safer in terms of crossing streets, pedestrian traffic. If a car is crossing your path, the dog will get between the handler and the car to make sure the handler's safe. And I also use the cane at times when I do work the dog. Let's say there might be an area where I want to find out a little bit more detail that the dog can't give me information about. I'll use a cane. Cruz is my third one, and like I say, each one is a different personality. I've learned a lot about dogs since my first one, Frisco, and I wasn't partial towards lab until after Frisco, and I would not have any other dog but a lab now. I think they're extremely intelligent, very gentle, easy to work with, and all around good around people. Each one's different. You have to unlearn the practice of the previous one and learn the practice of the new one. Oh, Cruiser's a lot more lively, a lot more willing to work. He loves work. Telly was a good guide, but work was not his top priority. And I'll give you an example. When I retired Frisco, my first guide, and Telly was working, a cab pulled up. I ordered a cab, and I leaned over and said, okay, it's time to go. And I put the harness on the dog, opened the door, walked out. I still had the leash in my hand. I was holding on to the harness. And we were midway down the sidewalk, and I reached down, felt the collar, wrong dog. Frisco went into the harness. He went into Telly's harness. Telly was still on the couch.
Oh my gosh.
That's pretty indicative of how willing Telly was towards work. He would prefer to stay home. Work was not his highest priority. Frisco was retired. He still wanted to work. A year ago, the furthest thing from my mind is that I'd have anything to deal with cancer. It's always been in the back of my mind. My dad died of cancer when he was 47, so I had that lingering thought that I might get it, but I wasn't sure. And my dad's cancer may have been brought on by his wounds, and he was severely wounded during World War II, shrapnel wounds, and. But he died in 1962, again, age 47, so he was pretty young when he died. Last year, my oldest brother died of cancer, colon and liver cancer. I was diagnosed with esophageal cancer. I had 6 chemo. I also had 28 sessions of radiation, and I'm now a cancer survivor in recovery. I will be visiting doctors pretty intensely for the next couple of years. If the cancer does come back, more than likely it'll come back within the first year or two. By 5 years out, I'll be considered cured if I don't have a relapse of cancer. And I'm looking at the 5 year. Oh, I owe it to my parents. Like I say, my dad died when he was 47, and my mom died when she was 64. But in the years that when they were together, before he died, and I was 9 years old when my dad died. Those were some of the most influential years of my life. So those first 9 years of my life really set the tone for my life. The love, the care, the stability that they gave me in those early years carried me through some really tough times years later. And I look back on that, and I'm very grateful for those times. That we were a very close family prior to my dad's death. And I have very fond memories of Christmas and family get-togethers. And it was a very warm, comforting feeling. And I think back on that, and that carries me through. Like I say, I had carried me through, and will carry me through tough times. Either what I may have in the future, I've got a good history to fall back on, and I owe it to my parents. They established in me at a very early age that determination to do the most I could with what I had. Do the most you can with what you have. Don't let people tell you you can't do something. Do what you decide you can do, the best way you can do it.
I've probably listened to that particular sound bite at least 50 times through all of the edits I've done with this story. And I'm still incredibly moved by his parting words. I hope you enjoyed his story. This episode reminds me of a flyer that my mom has tacked up in the home office at my parents' house. I've read it and continue to read it since I was able to read. And it's really stuck with me and had kind of a big impact on my life. So I thought I'd share it with you today. It's a piece called Attitude by Charles Swindoll. The longer I live, the more I realize the impact of attitude on life. Attitude to me is more important than facts. It is more important than the past, than education, than money, than circumstances, than failures, than successes, than what other people think or say or do. The remarkable thing is we have a choice every day regarding the attitude we will embrace for that day. We cannot change our past. We cannot change the fact that people will act in a certain way. We cannot change the inevitable. The only thing we can do is play on the one string we have, and that is our attitude. I am convinced that life is 10% what happens to me, and 90% how I react to it. And so it is with you. We are in charge of our attitudes. This episode was recorded and produced by myself, Natalie Jennings, with help from Daniel Zamzow. Photos by Natalie Jennings, web layout and design by Aaron Woods. Music heard throughout this episode is sampled from Eric Matias of soundimage.org and Ben Sound. I'd also like to thank Guide Dogs for the Blind for allowing us to record part of this story during their luncheon. And I'd like to remind you that if you've been enjoying this podcast, please visit us on iTunes where you can subscribe to the podcast. But better yet, we would love it and appreciate it very much if you could leave us a review. Reviews help new listeners learn a little bit more about what we're up to. They also help us in the iTunes world to reach more listeners. So head over to iTunes and search A Face Project. We appreciate it very much, and we'll be back in a couple of weeks.
I was also held back in kindergarten because I also argued with the teacher, so I was 2 years behind my fellow students, and I learned early on that you don't argue with the teacher. Definitely not the kindergarten teacher. Evidently she wielded a lot of power.